Thanks for listening to the Foundations podcast. It is our goal to bring the extraordinary life of Jesus to a lost and broken world. If you want to find out more about us, you can find it at foundationschurch.org, and we'd invite you to subscribe to the podcast as well as review it so that more people can hear. Today, we're in week 1 of our series, Mental Health and the Lies We Believe, where we're looking at the intersection of kind of two of the most important things, what we believe about God and what we believe about ourselves. And I'm joined here by Lee Freeman. Lee, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're part of this conversation today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to be fair, there are a lot of people who could be sitting in this chair today, but I'm grateful to be here and excited for the conversation. I am a clinical mental health counselor. I work in private practice and have a master's degree doing that. So that's what brings me here.
Awesome. Super excited as we get to talk about this. And as we kind of get into this series, maybe before we kind of dive into a topic for today, is there anything just needs to be said just in general about this topic or kind of as we get started on it?
Yeah, man, I don't know if it needs to be said, but I will just admit that I have some tension in myself about the title, and I don't think that's a bad thing. It's actually something that I really like about our church, that we'll step into hard spaces and we'll step into even something that might be controversial. Like personally, on one hand, I really like the title because there are lies out in the world, and there's an enemy, a real enemy that is telling us lies. And the reason that I struggle with it a little bit is that sometimes people could hear that and feel shame because I'm believing a lie. And so if I'm believing it, then I need to fix it, and there's something wrong with me or whatever. There are these other, ironically, lies that we kind of internalize about that. And I just want to clarify that is not the heart at all. Because that's not God's heart. God offers us, when we are believing lies, when our perspectives are skewed, He offers us truth. He offers us peace. It's invitational, and it's compassionate, right? And so that's really the heart behind this, is not to condemn people for believing these lies, but just to invite them to something better.
That's beautiful and so true. I feel like even my qualification for being a part of this is less that I'm a pastor and more that I'm like, I feel that struggle in such a real way. Yeah. And I think, to be fair too, through something that can be unintended about this topic, and even the title, like you said, is it can feel like it's a simple knowledge thing, and so, hey, if we just say this is the lie and we know the truth, something's just going to happen,
right?
And it's something much deeper and longer and all that's going to take place to actually work through that. And that's not something that's just out there for everyone else. Like that's me. Like this is something that exposes many things we're going to talk about, our lives that have directed me in my life.
Absolutely. And the way that we feel about that, again, that's another one of those opportunities for a lie to creep in there, is that, if I know what's true, I should be able to just fix it, right? But it is so often the work of a lifetime, not the work of a weekend necessarily. And it's not something that we should feel shame for because we can't fix it immediately. This is what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. Like, there's this process of sanctification that isn't complete until we reach heaven. And so the sitting in the tension of that, and the waiting and the working, the strain that's sometimes involved with trying to work toward becoming more Christ-like, that requires patience and really even like self-compassion that recognizes our image-bearing nature and our infinite value in Jesus's eyes.
Yeah, no, so good. Today, we're kind of looking at the lie that everyone has it figured out except for me,
Mm-hmm.
And
except for you.
Except for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have it figured out.
Right. Yeah.
So again, this is a lie that's dictated much of my life. So
I feel you, Kevin. I do.
everyone has it all figured out except for me. And really just to put it out there, like the truth, the kind of, orienting around is that everyone has a fundamental need for God's intervention. Mm-hmm. So anyways, as we kind of step into this, what is this root belief of this lie that everyone has it figured out except for me? Like, where does this show up in kind of our culture or psychology or different places?
Yeah, man, it's such a great question. And like, I feel like volumes could be written in response to that. There's so much to it, but I think in some sense, the root of it all comes back to the fact that there is a real enemy, that there is a real spiritual war going on, a war for our souls. And there is an enemy actively speaking lies into the world and into ourselves.
Yeah.
I heard, this was a while ago, but at a conference, one of the best things that really landed with me was the speaker said, not every thought that comes into our head is our own. And that was so liberating for me, because we can have a tendency, again, to claim thoughts. I heard a counselor the other day saying, we have a tendency, like when we're feeling anxiety, to say, I am anxious, as if my entire being has become that, as if my worth is tied up in that. But there's just, I'm having this feeling of anxiety, right?
Yeah.
And that's a powerful distinction. But I think that's true in the world in a broader sense as well, that not every thought that comes into our head is our own, that the enemy is speaking thoughts, that the world is speaking thoughts. And so, there's a lot we could say about input. What are we listening to? Because there are messages about the world, about ourselves, about our value, about our future that are woven into that. And so we want to seek sources of truth. But when I look at my own life and the places where I'm hearing messages from, a lot of times it's the internet and social media and advertising and just people who maybe I shouldn't be getting my life advice from. Right?
Yes.
And that's not, again, that's not necessarily bad, but that awareness of what is my input and what is my source of truth, I think is terribly important.
Yes. And it seems like, obviously for a long time since humans have existed, like comparison has been a thing.
Yep.
So, I mean, I think we all understand that struggle, just as a person, as a man, as a husband, as a father. Like, I can always think of other people that can do this better than me. Like, it's just in my job, even as a pastor, like imposter syndrome, the way that like, it's all for me. It's two things. It's one, what you said, it's emotions. It's the feeling, being like, I know the quote from Tim Keller that was reference of emotions make horrible guides, or they're gauges, not guides, type thing. And
so good.
And so there is such a key thing. Like, one, I do derive my full definition from that emotion, but then I just look at other people who are doing things better than me. Yeah. And I just feel inadequate. Yeah. Because of that. Obviously, then you bring the internet and social media.
Yeah, then we have a way bigger catalog of comparison.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, how has that heightened this comparison game even more in your experience, especially in your practice, I guess?
Yeah. It's pervasive and it's ubiquitous, and I'm using too many big words here, but I think there's a sinister quality to it. So some of my background, my undergrad degree was in marketing, and I was really drawn to that because of the creative aspect. But as I learned about the sort of underbelly of the business world, I realized there really is this sinister aspect that is kind of about manipulating people, and obviously that can be done for good or for evil, right? So we can sort of manipulate, can be a bad word, but we can help convince people of truth. We can help move people toward holiness, or we can manipulate people to sell more. Or whatever, and social media is, we have to be real about the fact that social media is very strategically designed by some of the brightest minds in the world to be addictive, to shape thinking. It's one of the most powerful tools that the enemy has. Now, again, it can be used for good as well.
Yes.
So I don't want to just, write the whole thing off, because there are some wonderful believers who are using social media to spread truth and to spread love. But we have to be aware of who are we following, because social media is one of the most powerful discipleship tools in the world. And so we have to look at who are we being discipled by on social media. But certainly we have access to be able to look at, literally countless comparison points to say, oh, I'm not measuring up. And I loved what Grant said in the message too, of like, we often make the mistake of comparing our blooper reel to someone else's highlight reel. And that's what social media is. Too often. There are exceptions, certainly, but too often it's people's highlight reel, and that makes sense. But we just want to be realistic about the fact that we can't compare our blooper reel to their highlight reel.
And it makes sense that you share your highlights on social media. Like, that's normal. That's not bad. But then everyone that's watching those highlights, you compare it thinking that's their life all the time. And it's the same way for my own strengths and weaknesses. I compare my weaknesses with other people's strengths.
Right.
Just naturally. It's what we do. We don't ever take the full picture of the uniqueness of who I am and the full package and uniqueness of who someone else is.
Yes, I think that's right on. And I think so much of this topic also ties to an understanding of God's design is for you to be incomplete and for me to be incomplete. Like, he's designed the body of Christ, and he talks to us about, like, I have a unique function to serve within the body, and so do you. So if I'm going like, man, like, I am not seeing very well, but I'm a foot, like, that's okay. I'm not supposed to. Like, imagine how terrible it would be if I had an eye on the bottom of my foot. Like, that would be awful in a lot of ways, right? And so, but when I recognize, oh, that's not my function. Like, it's okay for me to be bad at seeing. I'm not a seer. Like, that's not what I'm called to do in the body of Christ here. So I think that can help me make space for the ways in which I am not as good at someone else. I can actually rejoice in that, in my weakness and in God's beautiful design, that, thank the Lord, I don't have to be good at all this stuff.
Yeah, that doesn't sit well though with like my American ideal of who I'm supposed to be. Like, I'm supposed to be everything. I'm supposed to have my life together. And again, that's what it feels like too when I look at my friends and people I know on social media, or celebrities or different, like, it feels like they have their life together until like that news headline comes out. But it's
right.
Like, and it really is like, that's the assumption. Like, there is this myth that we have it all, that people have it all together, and if you don't, you're the exception. That's there.
And the great irony there is, right, when we look back on our own lives and times when we've most connected with another person, so often it's in those moments of vulnerability when we hear how they're struggling. Right? But then as soon as the tables are turned and it's time for me to be vulnerable,
that's so good.
I can have amnesia.
No, that's so true. And even I'm just thinking back to like these different that things, like we're being formed by all these things and stuff. Of course, like, everything's forming us, like that whole idea. I think the thing that's humbling, or maybe reveals something, it's not just the message that is forming us, it's sometimes the means. It's the method. It's because I think about social media, like, of course, I don't think we're trying to sit here and say it's unhealthy, it's all bad, no one should be on. Like, no, there's great uses, like the internet in general.
Right.
But the truth is, the very means of it, not just the message that comes, but the very means of it is forming us into a person of some sort, to value certain things, to act in certain ways. And sometimes I think it's just easy to view things as neutral, that aren't neutral, and are forming us more than we recognize.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can be naive about the influence that things have. I know this has been the case in my life. This might be a weird connection, but it makes me think about my marriage even. And when my wife and I got married, there was a process of kind of learning, like, oh, what are the influences that are wise? What are the boundaries that are wise for our marriage? Because again, when we recognize the reality of the spiritual war that underpins our existence, we take certain precautionary measures, right? We're not going to be flippant about things that can take us out of the game, right? Or can really take us out of the fight, can deeply injure us, and then we're in the hospital ward instead of on the battlefield. And so certainly social media is one of those that, like, we got to be real about the weapon that it can be for good or for evil.
Yes, I mean, that's a whole thing my wife and I are trying to process. Even, like, our kids aren't there yet. Yeah. And I don't ever want them to be there, to be honest. But, like, God. I know eventually it's going to be more of a thing. Yeah. Well, you probably already spoke to this a little bit here and there, but, like, how, kind of thinking about this lie, this truth that God invites us into, how can we reframe our thinking? One, to realize that no one has this figured out, and again, probably spoke to that a little bit, and then even how does God speak into this lie? Anything that kind of comes to mind for either? How do we reframe our thinking around this to understand the reality of this lie, as well as how does God speak into this or want to reframe our thinking as well?
Yeah, man. It's so broad. There's so much to it that can be said, but yeah, I think it's okay to not know, and it's okay to not know right now. I think there are some questions that are really important. Who am I, and what am I doing here, and what is God calling me to in my life? Like, these questions are, again, sometimes the work of a lifetime, and the answer can be dynamic. For me, God's called me to things that I never could have foreseen, and sometimes our need for control or desire for control can close our ears to what God is trying to say to us, or what He's trying to lead us to. And so, it's, again, I at the risk of oversimplifying, because this is not a thing where you should feel shame if this is not where you're at, but just, like, it's okay for us to not know. And I think the more we embrace that, the more we all kind of step into those vulnerabilities, the more the body of Christ can cohere. In this day and age, there's so much division, there's so much isolation and loneliness. And I think the more we can be vulnerable and say, like, man, I don't have this piece figured out yet. Like, Kevin, what do you think about this? Like, what have you seen in your life? Like, that allows us to connect, to strengthen one another as brothers, to build up the body of Christ, and for you to function in your gifting and for me to function in mine. It's one of the great ironies of being a believer, I think. But yeah, just embracing that we don't have to know. We don't have to have it all together. We don't have to have all the answers. We're not supposed to.
But yeah, and that's not the message we get everywhere else.
Right.
And even that's not the idea that we look at the successful people. We look at the people that have it all figured out, and we just assume. Yeah. And that's what I so appreciate about, like, the base, like, one of the foundations of the Christian faith, and this is the whole idea. Again, this is really simple. God's God and I'm not.
Right.
And so, I mean, there's one pastor and therapist has used the term, let God be God-sized and let you be human-sized. Nice. And I think, like, there's just a beautiful invitation of what that, like, sure, that's a reality. You can take God out of the picture and we can recognize, of course, we can't have it all together, know how to do everything, be this perfect ideal of a person. But that's the invitation of God, is, like, we don't have to be, like, and then even that's the foundation of the gospel, is to say, like, no, the point is you don't have it together. The point is you are broken and you are messed up.
Absolutely. That's the whole, like, New Testament versus Old Testament thing, right? Like, Old Testament, we tried and we tried and we tried and we failed and we failed and we failed, and thank God He made a way so that we wouldn't have to keep striving and inevitably failing. It can be, again, perspective is so much of this, because the perspective can be like, oh man, like, I'm the worst because I can't do it on my own. It's like, no, that's just who we are. Like, and it can be so freeing that we don't have to be that.
Yes.
I mean, it's like an elephant trying to climb a tree or something. Like, it's okay. Like, you're not supposed to climb that tree. Like, you're
sense.
so good at so many other things, right?
Uh-huh.
And you're fearfully and wonderfully made, and you're not made to do that.
Yes.
Right? We're not made to have all of the answers or to have everything all together. We're made to be reliant on the one who made us.
And that's not an exception. Like, there's full life in that. Like,
It's
the
beautiful.
fulfillment is found in that.
Oh man, it's so free to just be
Yes.
able to abide. And that's one of the other things that it makes me think of just abiding, like just being in God's presence. Like, basically our job is just to be connected to him, the vine, and then we get everything. Like, what a branch, like, trying to, like, take care of everything without being connected, like, we're gonna wither and die. But yeah, how free it can be to just, like, abide, be in the vine, and soak up the sun, and
Yes, which I recognize for different people listening to that might be a really churchy word, or even that's probably a lot more to be said about that.
For
like,
sure.
What does it even look like to abide? And but that is like, there is, and maybe we can say more about that kind of in the future, even some practices and different things that we'll speak towards. But yes, this is the reality that we're invited into. And I mean, even just the journeys that we see in Psalms of people that just don't have it figured out, like the full breadth of emotion that is poured out in those pages, or even just Paul, like how, again, we just overly sanctify him, just this perfect person. And whenever he says things like, I do what I don't want to do, or he says, like, God's strength is made perfect in my weakness. And, like, he admits this weakness.
In his weakness.
He boasts in his weakness. Yeah. Even considers, all the great stuff that he used to pride himself in, like, that's garbage next to knowing Christ. I mean, really back to that abiding.
Yeah.
So I guess, one of the, kind of laying the plane a little bit, one of the questions is, like, what does it look like? What are practices? What are rhythms? Maybe by yourself, with others? Like, what does that look like to begin to step toward the truth in a lie that's very pervasive in our culture and in our lives? What are some practices and rhythms that can help us live in the reality of God's truth?
Yeah, great question. I think the premise of all of it, that at some point, I think in the life of a believer, maybe in multiple points in the life of a believer, we've got to decide what is our ultimate source for truth, right? Whether we realize it or not, there's a priority list in our heads of, well, this thing, if there's a conflict between these two, I'm going to go with this thing, right? At the top of our list has to be something objective and has to be the truth authored by the creator of the universe. That is the only it's the only way to build it, right? That has to be our ultimate source of truth. And if that's our ultimate source of truth, then thank God he gave us the Bible, and the Bible gives us a whole lot of clarity on a whole lot of stuff. So that's ultimately how I'm going to answer your question, is by just touching on a couple of the things from the Bible about how we practically do this.
Cool.
So then it's this process of reminding ourselves, right? Renewing our minds and taking thoughts captive. So when those thoughts come in that are not always from ourselves, that sometimes come from external influences or the enemy or whatever, we can notice them. We can renew our mind in light of what is ultimately true. And I think one of the things that often derails people is when they judge themselves for a thought that came into their mind, or they personalize it and go, oh, that's me. And then they get caught in, like, why am I thinking that? What's wrong with, like, all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Rather than going, oh, that's a thought. What's a better thought? Like, what's true? Like, what would God have me believe? And there doesn't have to be any shame or judgment in that. Again, it's invitational. It's compassionate. Like, thank God we've got this loving God who wants to bring us into his presence and make us more like him, and have this relationship with us. So it's this it's this over time, reminding ourselves, meditating on truth. And part of that is also being aware of our input, of reading the Bible, the authoritative source of truth, right?
Yes.
And that can remind us as we take that in, like, that shapes us, that forms us. Part of it is also being discipled and living in Christian community, because those are people who also recognize the same truth.
Yeah.
And as we do those things, like those things have a way of calibrating us. And then there's also like, it's not just knowledge, but it's also relationship. It's also the heart posture of leaning into relationship with God through prayer and through service and these other kind of Christian disciplines that we do to embrace the richness and fullness of a life with Jesus.
Well, it's so good. I know we'll probably speak a lot more in the future too, but like the importance of community in every one of these is just vital. It's not just a box to check. It's the place that we have other people that can help expose the lies in our life. And I don't know, two of the things that just came to mind while you were talking is, like, especially on that kind of communal thing, for me, just the power of kind of communion or Eucharist, like just together as a church. Like for me, those are the moments, both personally and corporately, just be like, yeah, you're right, I'm not enough. I don't have what this takes. But Jesus, like, I can have life, I can have fullness. Like there is life that I'm not complete, and that's okay. And then the second thing that probably over the last several years that's been a big thing for myself and my family, probably more my wife and I, my kids are less aware, is the practice of Sabbath for us. That really is the place of trying to have a time every week where I'm purposely trying not to get something done. I'm purposely trying not to prove my worth in something. And just being like, and it's okay. Again, that's not just being lazy. There's other more intentional things we're trying to do, but just spend time in like the full things and not just accomplishing or controlling and those things.
Totally. We have this human tendency to focus on what's right in front of us. And the process of Sabbath, the process of communion, like it's an intentional putting something in front of us that gives us a godly perspective, right? And helps us to remember what is most important. Because without those reminders in front of us, our attention can be so focused on empty things that moth and rust destroy.
True that. Well, what's just a final, like, kind of wrap up encouragement that you would want to get, like, again, recognizing for probably both of us, but many people listening to this conversation, what's just an encouragement for someone of getting started, or just a reminder, something they need as they just seek to not let their life be driven by this lie that everyone else has it figured out except for them, but to step into this reality of God's truth, that everyone has a need for God, and that's actually where we discover this full life we're looking for.
I think remembering one of the most powerful things that I can do in the counseling space is not something that I do at all. It's just making space for people to turn their eyes toward God and to remind themselves of his posture toward them. So sometimes in a session where they're struggling with shame or self-doubt or paralysis or frustration that they're not moving forward as quickly as they want to, or whatever, it's just asking them, like, what does God feel about that? Like, can we take a moment and just ask him? And when we have that relationship with God, like, we have that availability, we can turn toward him and ask him how he feels about that. Because the Christian faith, like, there are definitely some universals, some disciplines that we're all called to. And it's also very beautifully individualistic, where we're all individual parts of the body, all individually gifted and called. And we have a relationship, like, it's first and foremost characterized by relationship, which is not formulaic, which is not one size fits all. And so there's so much compassion in that we can offer ourselves, that we can offer others. Even with this series, I think one of the other challenges that or misconceptions that we could walk away with is we could go, oh, well, like, the church, like the Sunday sermon is the answer for everything. But that is not the case. We have groups, we have all these ways to get involved, all these ways to serve, all of these offer richness, and God works through all of them. And there's also a piece where, just like with the physical body, like, if I break my leg, I could pray and God could do a miracle and fix that
Yes,
broken leg.
yes.
And he has designed our bodies to heal and all this stuff, right? And if it's, set the right way, or just, God takes over, like, it can heal without any medical intervention. And I can also go to a hospital, and there's no shame in going to an expert or, taking the right medication. God has given us medications are extensions of creation. Like, God created these substances, these chemicals to work. They're not surprises to God. And he has called and equipped doctors and counselors and people to provide medical professional assistance. And so, even within this series, if people are really struggling and find the need for help, I just want to encourage them. There is no shame. It is not anti-Christian or anti-biblical to seek professional help. And the church would love to step into that. I know, like, for people looking for referrals and things like that, if they don't know where to go to, the church wants to step into that too. So,
Oh, so good. No, and honestly, even for my own life, it was several years ago when it was a therapist that helped me step into God's loving presence in a new way, and even kind of change some of my own personal practices of how I communicate with God. Like, that has been game changing.
That's awesome
for me. Thank you so much for sharing. Look forward to talking more. I know there's plenty more to be said about this. Hey, thank you so much for listening to this episode today. We'd love to invite you to connect with us on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. Look forward to talking to you more next week.